Week 10 is upon us, and today we're breaking down some of our biggest buys in fantasy football, also a couple of players that we are selling in fantasy football, and we're getting into the stretch run, man. It's double-digit weeks. We're talking about players that could help us into the fantasy playoffs. I'm sure a lot of the people who have bad fantasy football teams are probably no longer watching our videos. It's mostly the players out there that are, 5-3 or whatever, 5-4, I guess, or better. As far as their records are concerned. So today we're going to break down a lot of players that can help you guys, hopefully for your championship run, but at the very least for your playoff pushes. So let's kick things off. I can start it off here with Kyren Williams as my number one buy. Kyren has the most untouchable workload in the NFL. When you look at kind of how he's been used the last couple of weeks, it's like, I'm not even shitting you, Danny. He played 99% of the snaps last week. He actually played almost every single snap. Which is crazy.
If I remember right, so they had 77 backfield snaps and he had 76 and Corum had 1, if I remember right.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. Like you can't make up a workload like that. All the stars are aligning for Kyren to be RB1 or very close to it down the stretch. When you combine the fact that Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are back on the field, which is obviously excellent for the offense. It's great for Matthew Stafford. Sean McVay has his full playbook at his disposal. Demarcus Robinson making plays downfield. Your ancillary receivers became ancillary again instead of being primary receivers. 4 of his next 5 games. Dolphins, Patriots, Saints, and Bills are all top 8 running back matchup in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. Only other game in that stretch that's a bad matchup is the Philadelphia Eagles, which will probably be a very high-scoring game environment.
Yeah.
So even if Kyren Williams isn't as efficient, he could probably punch in some touchdowns. In the fantasy playoffs, after that stretch of 5 games, he has the 49ers, the Jets, and the Arizona Cardinals, all high-scoring games. And in the championship, I'm pretty sure Kyren Williams might be a part owner of the Arizona Cardinals franchise because he literally destroys them every time he plays against them. So if you're looking for a guy that can help you get to the championship and then ideally win you a championship, Kyren Williams could be your dude. There is only 3 running backs I have ranked over him the entire rest of the season.
Yeah, and he's somebody that initially I kind of balked at. I'm like, am I going to buy Kyren high? Should I be treating him as a high-end RB1? And I think you are right in the sense that given the workload and given what we've seen from this offense, I do have to raise him up my rankings. The only issue for me at running back specifically is that, dude, I think there's 9 guys that you can put in any type of order. Now, if you guys are watching this and are curious which guys I'm referring to, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, Devon Achane, Kyren Williams, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Kenneth Walker. I think I've really separated from the pack here at running back. So in terms of buying Kyren Williams, again, what does that deal type of look like? Are you selling like a low-end wide receiver 1+ to get up to him? Are you transitioning off of one of these other top 9 running backs to do so? Or are you just going the road of, hey, I currently have a J.K. Dobbins, a James Cook, a Aaron Jones, for example, who are coming off big highs. Can I add, a solid starting type of piece to work up to Kyren? Like, how are you approaching the buy window? Because I'm assuming that people that have Kyren are going to know what they have with him. I mean, the guy's averaging, 19 points per game this year?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you'd have a guy or a team that's maybe not in a winning position that has Kyren, but there's a very good chance that whoever has Kyren might also have a decent record because he's been really good this year. But if you could take maybe Aaron Jones, Courtland Sutton, or, Deebo Samuel plus some other running back piece or something like that, that would make some sense to me if you could work up to Kyren that way. Hopefully the guy that you're trading with maybe has dealt with a lot of wide receiver injuries. It's very likely he has because there's like 78 wide receivers that have gone down in the last 4 or 5 weeks or so. So that's kind of how I would handle Kyren. Like I said, I agree with you in principle that there's like 9 or 10 running backs that are all kind of throw them in a hat. Whatever guy you like more is probably the guy you could rate higher. But when you're trying to tie break between those guys, the workload is untouchable. He has the best workload in the NFL. Like there's no running back who has a better workload than Kyren Williams. And then also you factor in the schedule, which is one of the best in the NFL. I mean, Breece and Bijan have really good schedules as well. Achane's got a pretty good schedule too. But like when you add in all those factors, I guess maybe you could argue that like some of those guys are more talented than Kyren, but at the same time, man, he just stacks up so well for fantasy football, especially when you factor in how much better this offense is with Cooper Kupp and Nacua. And we saw that exact same scenario play out last year. Remember last year when Kupp came back from injury? Him and Puka were firing back and forth, having big game after big game, and Kyren was just dominating. I could see that happening again.
Yeah, and he's somebody that I have warmed up on again, like hilariously, like about a month ago or so. People really got on me for hating on Kyren Williams. And I mean, again, he has proven me wrong, even despite those guys not being on the field. He was very productive. And like you said, even if this becomes more of a pass funneled offense with those 2-star wide receivers available, At the same time, that's going to be reflective in Vegas sportsbooks. This is going to be a team that going through every single week moving forward is going to be projected for 24, 25 plus points on a weekly basis. So really just trusting Matthew Stafford, trusting Sean McVay, trusting that even if the wide receivers get them down inside the 10-yard line, we still know what they want to do inside the 10-yard line. Once they're on the 7-yard line, once they're on the 4-yard line, that ball is going to 23's hands.
Yeah, exactly. And coming into the season, I was very much like, I'm not a Kyren Williams truther, but I'm not a Kyren Williams hater. I was kind of just like at market on him. I was like, yeah,
when
if
he fell
he's there
to the third, I was on him.
Yeah,
when
if he was there in the late second, I was more of a late second kind of guy on Kyren Williams. I would be in on that. And I got shares of him, especially as the offseason went along. I got a little bit more in on him because we didn't hear much, Blake Corum's going to take this away from him or Blake Corum's going to take that away from him. So yeah, I'm on the same page with Kyren. I think he is absolutely just an elite player for the rest of the season. And I warmed up to him pretty quickly early on in the season. So let's talk about your buy number one, staying in the NFC West. Actually, we're going to go to Deebo Samuel here.
Yeah, and the shared sentiment for all of my buys is that they're kind of players in situations that maybe we didn't expect coming into the year. And that's going to be Deebo Samuel. Now, if you told me coming into the year that Deebo Samuel would be able to finish the rest of the season after the 49ers bye week with no Brandon Ayuk on the field, we'd be ranking this guy as a 1-2 turn pick. We'd be ranking this guy as a top 15 overall pick in fantasy football because everybody's realized that the 49ers are a great offense. But unfortunately, the reason why we haven't drafted any of their players outside of McCaffrey in the first round is that Kittle, Ayuk, Deebo Samuel have eaten into each other. With no Brandon Ayuk on the field, we already saw what the Niners' intentions were for the usage for Deebo Samuel prior to him dealing with the pneumonia and the injuries earlier in the year. In the first 3 games that he played, 32%, 28%, and 19% target share in those games. And it's almost kind of like because he had 2 unproductive performances after Brandon Ayuk got hurt going into their bye week, people haven't really adjusted their valuation of Deebo Samuel. This is a guy that I think should be at the very minimum a top 15 wide receiver rest of the season, and a guy I think you can make the case for being the wide receiver 9, wide receiver 10 because of how strong this 49ers offense projects. We know Christian McCaffrey is projected to return this week. I think with McCaffrey returning, adding some more life to the running game, which has kind of faltered once Jordan Mason has been dealing with his AC joint sprain, we can get the classic 49ers offense that everybody's been talking about as the best unit in the league across these last few years. And when it is operating at its full capacity, when we've seen the Niners be a 26, 27 plus point per game team, Deebo Samuel has been the biggest beneficiary because we know he's going to touch it on the ground. We know he's going to command volume through the air. And assuming he's fully recovered from this pneumonia and the injuries he was dealing with, the guy can be an absolute league winner down the stretch. I personally think at this current point, you could be able to get him for mid-range wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 2 price tags. Like, I think you can get him straight up for Devontae Adams right now.
Yeah, like I think the crucial point that you made there is, to me, this is the premier run out for Deebo Samuel, knowing that McCaffrey's coming back. Now, people might think that's like kind of counterintuitive or counterproductive. You might think, okay, isn't it better that both Ayuk and McCaffrey are out? But the offense was operating at its best in the first 3 games when Jordan Mason was playing at a super high level, and they were scoring, 30 points a game. They've only scored 30 points 2 times since week 3 when Jordan Mason started to kind of taper off his production. And we saw, Deebo Samuel, obviously he still has big plays in his, in his repertoire and that kind of thing. But McCaffrey makes this offense go. Like, he is going to come back this week and he is going to make this offense what it was for the last couple of years that he's been there, which is every time the 49ers offense is on the field, you're expecting a touchdown drive. And McCaffrey's going to eat into that, and he's probably going to be a massive league winner at his price tag right now, who also is probably a half decent buy low himself. But Deebo Samuel, without Ayuk on the field, is going to feast. And like you said, he's probably a guy that if we redrafted today from this point onward, should be ranked as like a late first, early second round type of asset. But that's not where you'd have to pay for him right now. If you could get him for some of the trades you guys can see on the screen, Kareem Hunt, selling high on like Josh Jacobs and JSN to get Deebo Samuel, selling high on like a Chase Brown plus a small, like another piece like a Courtland Sutton or a Cedric Tillman or somebody coming off of big weeks, go get a real difference maker for one of the best offenses in the league.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it boils down to, because we know Deebo Samuel's value, like I said, it's not going to be like a Malik Neighbors where he goes out there and commands 13, 14 targets in a hopeless offense, because that's basically what the Giants are. The way Deebo Samuel's been paying off is maybe it's only 6 to 9 targets, but it's 6 to 9 extremely efficient targets that get him into space, that give him a ton of yak opportunity. And as we know, once they get into the goal line situation, who knows? Maybe they're fully unwilling to not completely give McCaffrey back his full inside the 5, inside the 10 work because they want him to ramp up. Maybe we even keep seeing some Deebo Samuel touches inside the 5, inside the 10, which, again, I'm only saying as it could be an added plus. That's not even the expectation, because even if we knew he wasn't getting those carries, he could be an 18 plus, 19 plus PPR point per game scorer. If he does start contributing, end arounds in the backfield, being lined up in some pony personnel, he gets a carry inside the tackles. I mean, that could only benefit Deebo Samuel's bottom line.
Yeah, it's like, you remember the old NFL Films documentary where in the Broncos Super Bowl, Terrell Davis he needs to be in the backfield even though he has like a severe migraine. And they're like, if you're not in the game, they're not going to believe that we're going to run it. Ironically, that was Kyle Shanahan's dad saying that. Yeah. It's when 22's in the game, like you behave different as a defense. Like when McCaffrey's out there, you're gonna pay less attention to Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and everybody else.
Inherently, you have to.
Inherently, like McCaffrey is your number one priority to stop, and not only as a runner, but as a receiver as well, because that's what makes him a future Hall of Famer. So yeah, I think McCaffrey being back is just excellent for this offense in general. It doesn't seem like it would be good for Brock Purdy or Deebo or George Kittle, but it is.
Yeah, I mean, especially too, just think about it schematically, right? When McCaffrey is running a flare screen versus when Jordan Mason's running a flare screen, like what's going to cause more urgency from a defense?
Yeah, it's going to be McCaffrey. Nobody wants to get beat by 22. That's exactly why he's as good as he is. So let's go to the next buy that we have here, which is Brian Thomas Jr. for me. Brian Thomas Jr., obviously, he's had an excellent rookie season, 2.4 yards per route run, top 12 in the NFL among wide receivers, 80.4 PFF receiving grade, which is top 17 among wide receivers. He's been elite when he's been on the field, but I think we have one of these like 80 cents on the dollar type of buying windows right now, because even though he ranks number 13 in total PPR points as a rookie, like, do you know how hard that is to do as a rookie on a terrible not a terrible offense, but a terrible team, a team that's not winning any games with kind of a bad coaching staff with proven target earners like Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk. The backs can contribute out of the backfield. Gabe Davis gets some targets here and there. That's really difficult to do, man. The second half of the season is when rookies start to come on. And if what Brian Thomas Jr. has done in the first half of the season is any indication of what he's capable of doing in the second half of the season, especially now with Christian Kirk on the shelf for the year, the injury is going to probably scare people off, and they're not going to see this like mythological ceiling that Brian Thomas really does have at the rest of the season point. Not only that, but he plays the Vikings, the Lions, and then he has a bye, and then he has the Texans the next 3 games on his schedule. The Vikings, the Lions, and the Texans are all bottom 8 defenses versus fantasy wide receivers.
Yeah, it's pretty funny at wide receiver right now, because I just mentioned how there's like a top 9, top 10 overall running back, and I said top 9. You're right. It is top 10. McCaffrey grazed my mind. In terms of wide receiver, though, it's also like kind of that way right now, too, where I would say the top 7 now with Lamb kind of dealing with the injury. Maybe you throw him in there regardless. Top 7, top 8, clear tier 1. Then it's like, okay, well, 9 to like 15, you can argue in any order, like Drake London, Cooper Kupp, Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua, Deebo Samuel, who we just mentioned, Jaden Reed, I believe it is in there. And then Brian Thomas would also be in there for me. So it's like, you just want one of these guys on your team straight up. And with Brian Thomas Jr., again, I can make the case that he should rank above Jaden Reed, Deebo Samuel, Puka Nacua, Garrett Wilson, assuming he's fully healthy. If I view him on level with those guys, I just simply don't think the market does, with the chest injury, with the bad performance coming off of it, and with how up and down, I think is the best way to describe the Jags offense this week.
Yeah. And just the fact too that people don't like investing in the Jaguars offense. People don't like investing in rookie wide receivers sometimes, especially if you play with a bunch of boomers. People don't expect, guys to really just come on down the stretch. And it happens every year. We see it all the time with rookie wide receivers. And because Thomas has been so elite so far, if he kicks into another gear, we're talking about a guy who might be one of the best 5 to 10 receivers in the NFL by the end of his rookie season. And that's what you want on your roster. And Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson's offense, we can go back and forth about how they're like not really doing him any favors or whatever, but Lawrence is a good enough quarterback to feed a number 1 guy. Like it's not like he's a terrible QB. I think he's definitely capable of getting Brian Thomas Jr. on big plays, on, over the middle targets. Like without Kirk out there, it's possible that Thomas plays more of a possession receiver role than we've seen from him thus far.
Well, it's pretty simple as this. He's a rookie wide receiver averaging 14 PPR points per game so far this year, wide receiver 13 in terms of points per game. And he's currently being valued under the wide receiver 13 price tag, despite him being a rookie.
Yeah, which is crazy because you'd think logically he would probably only get better. Like if you can get like some of these trades, man, like Jalen Waddle and Travis Etienne for Brian Thomas, or Najee Harris or Chase Brown, or like I like some of those players, but like, come on now. Like, what are we doing here? This is a guy that's a locked and loaded every week starter, no matter the matchup. And like I said, his schedule's pretty good, especially over the next couple of weeks. If you can take RB2, insert an RB2 here, Brian Robinson, James Conner, somebody like that, add in Cedric Tillman, Courtland Sutton, somebody coming off a big week. How close does that get you to Brian Thomas Jr.? You might be able to get there given the bias people have because he's currently banged up, the fact that he plays for the Jags, the fact that he's a rookie. There's a number of factors compiling probably in people's minds.
Yeah, no, I agree. You won't hear any negative Brian Thomas Jr. talk from me. Obviously, again, I was extremely high on him since I watched him. He lands in the situation with the Jags. I thought maybe it'd be kind of a slow burn where he peaks, like you said, at the end of the year, but he's just been consistently dominant all year. So I can only imagine if he does take another talent step up. Like, are we looking at Nico Collins 2.0? Are we looking at a guy that in the tail end of the year can average over 3.0 yards per route run, be a guy that averages 18 plus, 19 plus points per game? I don't think that people are baking in the upside that Brian Thomas Jr. has going forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So speaking of upside that players have going forward, and a lot of, I mean, other than the Jags, we've talked about a lot of good offenses so far. What are you thinking with Isaiah Pacheco here?
Yeah, and again, there is context here. Like if you're 3-6 and you can't afford to wait maybe the next 2 to 3 weeks while Pacheco ramps up, gets back to his workload, he's probably not the buy for you. However, if you're even 5-4 or above, 6-3, 7-2, you're in a very advantageous spot where you're probably looking at a bye week. Isaiah Pacheco has the opportunity to win people fantasy football leagues down the stretch. So let's just assume the next 2 weeks he doesn't play and he's on track to return in week 12. Week 12, they play the Carolina Panthers. After that, they play the Raiders, the Chargers, the Browns, the Texans, the Steelers. So at the very minimum, you have a 3-week period when he's ramping up where he has elite matchups. We're talking, I mean, the Panthers and Raiders, for Christ's sakes, are two of the worst run defenses that I've ever seen, to be quite frank. And if you were to take what Kareem Hunt has done in the absence of Isaiah Pacheco, it's easy to convince yourself that had Isaiah Pacheco been healthy, not only would he have been one of the league winners in fantasy football, he would have the opportunity to be the RB1 overall. Kareem Hunt, off the street, not even on an NFL roster, not even on an NFL practice squad roster going into the year. Since week 5, the RB4, the RB9, the RB22, the RB11 on a week-to-week basis. And when you actually overall look at the PPR scoring, 18.7 points, 22.3 points, 13.3 points, and 18.7 PPR points. You want to hear the craziest part? Does not even remotely compare to the workload that Isaiah Pacheco was getting before he got hurt. In the first game that they played, Isaiah Pacheco had 80% of the snaps, 70% of the rushing attempts, and 71% of the routes. For reference with Kareem Hunt, he's had 2 games above that 79% rushing attempt percentage. And on top of that, has not been running routes, has 0 games with over 50+% of the routes since he's become the full-time running back for the Chiefs. Whereas, like I said, Pacheco was at above 70%. There's a very real possibility that if Pacheco stayed healthy, he would be 1.5x what Kareem Hunt is doing right now. And Kareem Hunt, on a point-per-game basis, has been an RB1 in fantasy football. When he comes back, Isaiah Pacheco, like I've heard people say, oh, yeah, this might be a timeshare now. You know, Kareem Hunt might be involved, or Carson Steele, they like out of the backfield, tough runner between the tackles. It's like, when Isaiah Pacheco is healthy, he is this team's bell cow running back. And he is the bell cow running back for a team with the best guard center guard trio in the NFL there in Kansas City, with a guy that runs as efficiently as Isaiah Pacheco does. And if he gets the type of Kareem Hunt goal line rule, man, I mean, I said 23+ points per game. I think that would be the expectation.
Yeah. I mean, so it is very clear that a lot of people are anchored in the fact that because Kareem Hunt's good, he's earned a role. Need I remind you that the Chiefs went into the season without Kareem Hunt or Samaje Perine on their roster coming into the season? They were prepared to give him everything under the sun. Now, again, maybe you could argue that because, you know, this is a team that's poised for a Super Bowl run, maybe they don't want to overload Isaiah Pacheco coming off of the injury. I think that's definitely fair. And that is easily the biggest risk about buying Isaiah Pacheco, and why I think you'd have to look yourself in the mirror. If you wanted to buy Isaiah Pacheco, you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, could I lose 3 of my next 5 games and be okay in my fantasy league? Yeah. If you could do that, like, because, or maybe you just have the depth where you're able to just, you know, shop off
7-2,
like
6-3.
You need to be probably 6-3 or better, in my opinion, or 5-4 with a shit ton of points for and a lot of depth. That would be the only way that I would, you know, be trading for Isaiah Pacheco. But like you said, dude, even if we get this Isaiah Pacheco workload weeks 14 to 17 only, that's the only time of the year we see it, bro. He's literally going to be immaculate for fantasy. He's running behind an elite offensive line, and he gets every piece of workload under the sun. And again, I do not think Kareem Hunt will factor very much into the backfield once Pacheco is back to full strength.
I completely agree. Now with Pacheco, real quick too, even if you just told me you were getting Kareem Hunt level production, and people might be saying, well, that's a lot. It's like, well, that's also what, 20, 30% less in terms of the comparable workload that he was getting in the first week prior to getting hurt in week 2, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, you have to be a little concerned about the efficiency drop off because of the injury as well. Like this is the same injury, need I remind you, that Tony Pollard came off of and looked terrible last year, right? So it is possible that he doesn't look the same, and this is a timeshare simply because he doesn't look as good as he normally does.
And the way I would combat that is if you look at Kareem Hunt's efficiency, it's not like he's been thriving. It's not like he's been a guy that's gone out there and been a 4.8 plus yards per carry, Isaiah Pacheco level efficiency back. Dude, like he's been an RB1 in fantasy at like the mid 3s in terms of his yards per carry because he gets goal line equity.
I saw a chart somebody tweeted out. It's like plays that like your rushing yards above expectation and below expectation. And Kareem Hunt's like he's the midpoint. He's not rushing above expectation ever, but he's never rushing below expectation on his carries. He's been like the definition of like 4 yards in a cloud of dust, get what's there.
He's
like
Madison on a good offense.
Literally, he's Alexander Madison on a good offense is precisely what he's been. So again, I have a little bit more trepidation about Isaiah Pacheco. Like for example, it's funny that you bring him up. AJ in our listener redraft league offered me Isaiah Pacheco for Darnell Mooney. Now, I'm in a position where I could afford to lose Darnell Mooney.
You're 6-3.
I could afford to lose Darnell Mooney, no problem. But I do have a number of bye weeks coming up. I do still have Mike Evans out with an injury. I still have T. Higgins potentially out with an injury. So for me, I look at it as, that's probably the going rate for Isaiah Pacheco on the open market. And I think in a vacuum, that's probably a good deal considering I'm 6-3 with the most points for in the league. But at the same time, it's a risk that you're taking on. And I don't think it's a slam dunk. So if you could get him for less than Darnell Mooney, I think that's better.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. Now, for example, like I have like Hopkins. If AJ, if you're watching this and you wanted to swap me Pacheco for Hopkins, I'm also a 6-3 team in this league, and I would greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, see, for me, like AJ is also a Falcons fan too, so I'm sure Mooney appeals to him for that reason as well. But anyways, regardless, I think Pacheco is a good buy, but I would be a little careful with him. I don't think he's just a slam dunk. Buy him in every single league that you're 6-3 or better. I do think there is some risk that comes along with Pacheco. I think that it is possible that they use him sparingly until the NFL playoffs. Like, I think it's very possible that they do that.
Yeah, there's context for every pickup. Like, obviously, there's going to be risk when there's this much reward. If you can get a guy that can be a top 3 running back in playoff weeks for an RB25 price tag, I'm eating that risk every single time to get that reward.
Yeah, no, for sure. So let's rattle off 2 more combined buys, and then we'll get into the sells real quick. These ones are pretty straightforward. George Pickens and DJ Moore. We talked about DJ Moore last week. I believe you talked about George Pickens about 3 weeks ago.
Sir.
Both clear number 1 receivers, 28 and 25% target shares respectively. Russell Wilson, of course, has passed for more than 260 yards in both of his games as a starter so far. So that has really increased the passing floor of this offense. George Pickens is ceiling as well. We've seen him actually have a big performance back in week 7. He had 20.
Should have been 2 in a row.
He should have had 2 in a row because he was robbed on that touchdown play. So the passing floor of this.
One thing, how is it a rule in the NFL where if you tap the same foot twice, it doesn't count as 2 feet in? Like why is that a thing?
I don't know. I guess it has to be a shin, apparently, according to Garrett Wilson's touchdown catch. But like I said, George Pickens is a really good buy because I think it's going under the radar just how well the guy is playing and how well he's been taking over this like new number 1 receiver role, because we had questions about this going into the year, right? Like we didn't think it was a locked in foregone conclusion. This guy was going to command 28, 29% of the team's targets. We were like, if Deontay Johnson commanded targets while he was there, it's very possible that George Pickens stays at a 20% target share type of player, like, which would be good still, but you're not an elite alpha number 1 receiver. And that's what George Pickens has been with Russell Wilson on the field.
Exactly. I mean, heck, you can even extend that to across the entirety of the year. So now, obviously, when you have Fields, limited pass attempts, not the greatest overall passing volume that you're seeing, it's going to affect your bottom line. But in terms of his shares of this offense, like he's been an alpha all year. Across the year, 28% target share, 46% share of the air yards. Like we're talking about legitimate, like stud wide receiver 1 level percentages. So Pickens, I don't think the talent is stopping him from producing. And now that Russell Wilson is in town, I think he's got a legitimate wide receiver 2 ceiling that people weren't baking into when Fields was as the starting quarterback. Top of that, again, maybe there's some more pessimism. They go out there, they trade for Mike Williams. Again, Mike Williams is dust coming off an ACL, hasn't been great all year, but who knows? I've seen people in leagues where, they went to go trade for Mike Williams. They don't believe in George Pickens. Now, instead of the wide receiver 23 I priced him at, it's going to cost you the wide receiver 29 to be able to get him off my team because there's just natural pessimism built in. Basically, what we're trying to say, Russell Wilson makes this at the very minimum about a league average offense, if not slightly below average. Whereas with Justin Fields, from a passing perspective, they're one of the bottom 5 passing offenses in the league. If Russell Wilson can just sustain middle of the pack, slightly below middle of the pack level production for this passing offense, George Pickens can absolutely thrive. And agreed. The one thing too, like I said, 11.3 points isn't, or 11.4 points that he scored in week 8 isn't even indicative of the game that he had, because he comes down with that touchdown. We're looking at 18, 19 PPR points.
Yeah. No, I think it's possible that maybe you could sell someone who's more consistent on a better offense for a guy like George Pickens. Like, what if you could sell Khalil Shakir plus a small piece for George Pickens? I like Khalil Shakir. I have him on my Flock League team, but that would be the type of move that I would definitely explore. Quickly on Tank Dell. Tank Dell versus Pickens is probably a wash, but if you wanted Pickens for the alpha, big plays kind of thing, I think that's definitely fair. DJ Moore, we talked about last week, so I can probably just quickly skim through unless you have anything else.
I was just going to say one thing. Another guy, I think you might be able to get Pickens plus for JSN based off that big game he just had.
I mean, I'd be willing to play JSN plus for Pickens, to be honest.
I would too, but what I'm saying is I think the current market, you might even see JSN being valued above Pickens. And for me, again, I raised Pickens to my wide receiver 22 rest of the season. And that's basically built on the fact that I think he's a star wide receiver. I really do think he's taken that step up.
Yeah, no, he absolutely has. And DJ Moore has been a star wide receiver all year and all of his career, but he's been sub 8 fantasy points in PPR in 3 straight games, and he has a top 3 remaining schedule for wide receivers. And we broke this down last week, so we don't need to go super in depth with DJ Moore, but all you need to know about him is that he is a rookie quarterback heading into a bunch of matchups where the receivers are going to be getting open. They're going to be beating the opposing corners against them. We saw what Caleb Williams can do when that's the case. Against Jacksonville back before the bye, we saw when he had an easy matchup, he was able to crush and he was able to look like the first overall pick. I know everybody in Chicago right now wants Matt Eberflus gone and Shane Waldron gone right now, but DJ Moore and the offense should be able to turn it on down the stretch. And that's why I'm still buying DJ Moore as kind of a reissue from last week.
See, I'm a little bit more hesitant with Moore, not because of the ability itself, or like you said, I do think their offense is going to scale moving forward. It's more so that I also think Rome Odunze is just a very good player in his own right. Like, I really do feel like the alpha DJ Moore isn't as much of an alpha as we currently think, because I think down the stretch, there's a very real possibility that
he's had over a 20% target share in every single game.
I'm saying moving forward, because after the bye week, Rome Odunze has 13 targets to DJ Moore's 13 targets since their bye. And as we know, rookies scale up after the bye.
Which, again, I guess that's technically a negative, but I view that more as a positive because the issue for DJ Moore right now is the offense isn't good. So if Odunze is a good player, then that makes the offense better.
No, it's more so just for me. I feel like there shouldn't be as big of a gap between Odunze and Moore, because I think there's again, I'd probably give it like a 60, 65, 70% chance that Moore outproduces Odunze, but I still think top 10 pedigree prospect he was, there is still an opportunity Odunze can outproduce him. And in fact, actually on the year, he has more receiving yards. I didn't even realize that until right now.
Yeah, he's definitely had some big performances. He has 2 100-yard games, I believe, so far this year. The red zone production, the big plays of DJ Moore is kind of what I'm after. So you say it's like a 60% chance, 70% chance that DJ Moore outproduces Odunze. To me, it's like a 90% chance. Like, I think Odunze is a great player and he'll be good in the league for a long time, but I think it's very clear to me that he looks like a rookie receiver about 50% of the time. So for me, DJ Moore is just a sturdy veteran alpha wide receiver that's going to produce all year.
Yeah. I mean, you can even just take it as a take that buy the Bears wide receivers, because I think Odunze is probably underpriced on the market right now too.
Yeah, I could definitely make that argument as well. So let's, Daniel, let's rattle through these sells within like 5 minutes. I don't think we have to spend too much time on these guys. Courtland Sutton is my sell number 1, and it's pretty simple. He's had back-to-back weeks of top 15 PPR production. Shout out to Joe for beating Mason this week with him. Bo Nix and the Broncos have had 2 very easy matchups for wide receivers the last 2 games against Carolina and against the Baltimore Ravens. They still have their bye, so that's a factor that we need to kind of work into trades now this time of year, because some players have had buys, some haven't. Kansas City, Atlanta, and Las Vegas are his next 3 matchups, which are all tough matchups against number 1 wide receivers, primarily because they have like shutdown corners in some cases. But the Raiders and Falcons specifically are just more of a team that gives it up to like quarterbacks rushing and tight ends and stuff. It's weird. You'd think, oh, Raiders defense bad against fantasy wide receivers. They're actually been pretty good against wide receivers. They've been more so bad against running backs and tight ends and rushing quarterbacks and stuff is how they've been burned. So I would use Courtland Sutton to tier up. It's pretty simple. He's been a good receiver. He's a top 45 receiver rest of season, a guy that you can flex probably week in and week out.
It's like the almost opposite of what he was last year, where it was like he was a touchdown or bust quarterback last year with Russ and with Bo Nix. Because I mean, like obviously Russ and Bo Nix are just completely different stylistic quarterbacks. Russ, more of that danger shot, boundary style type of quarterback. Bo Nix, more of that efficient chain moving type of system that they're running with Sean Payton. But it's pretty remarkable because I think like with Courtland Sutton last year, he had less than 800 yards and 10 touchdowns. And this year he's getting there with his yards. You know what I mean? So again, a sidetrack, he's still a sell, but like, I just found it noticeable when I went through his box scores.
Yeah. And like I said, he's just the type of guy that you want to use to tier up. And same can be said for Cedric Tillman or anybody coming off of multiple solid weeks in a row who are more so like wide receiver 4s and 5s. Again, Cedric Tillman definitely on the rise. I think he's probably still a fine hold.
I got to buy him off you then. If the way you're talking about Tillman, I got to buy him.
I'm looking for anybody to buy him off me in the flock league right now. Cause I'm this close to doing something crazy for a running back at this point. Like I can't get one to save my life right now. So
I've offered you Brooks.
Brooks doesn't help me though. Cause I need to win.
Fair. Good point. I mean, you could go back to the Madison.
I told you, I'll give you Tillman plus for Tracy or Chase Brown. Like I'll do it.
Well, we'll see. But again, all jokes aside, Courtland Sutton, he's a very easy to tier up from player to tier up from at this point. So there's really no other further comment other than the fact that when the Denver Broncos wide receiver 1 is on a high in terms of his market value and now has a tougher schedule moving forward, maybe we should consider selling him. So I think you made a good case there. We'll just talk about Chuba Hubbard real quickly. And again, this is probably, if you're in a sharper league, probably a very obvious take. Jonathan Brooks is coming back. Team has their bye week in 2 weeks, so we're going to have another week of Jonathan Brooks fully getting up to speed in the NFL. And Chuba Hubbard's been phenomenal. Chuba Hubbard has been an RB1 in fantasy from a points per game perspective since week 2. So basically what the rationale here is, I'm not saying you're going to be able to sell Chuba Hubbard at top 15 level price tags, but also if there's still someone in your league that thinks because of how good Chuba Hubbard's been, he's going to A, be the clear-cut running back 1 over Jonathan Brooks, and B, be able to do what he's been doing, you may as well explore your options. Again, if you've had Chuba Hubbard up to this point, you probably have a good record in your league, considering he was probably, a 13th rounder, 14th rounder in your league, and you've been able to use him as an RB2 or better each week since. Like, can you go to the team that literally needs a win this week and can't afford to wait? Like, you might even be able to go to the Jonathan Brooks owner himself and say, hey, listen, like, you're 3-6 right now. You need wins. You can't wait till Jonathan Brooks gets back. This is what I'd be willing to do for Chuba Hubbard. And it's more than likely, if they're 3-6, going to have to be a situation where you add a piece of Chuba Hubbard and you tier up. But for a team that needs a win right now, Chuba Hubbard's going to be a top 13 to 15 running back in your rankings this week?
Like, here's the easy answer. Find the team with a lot of bye weeks, with a bad record, or a lot of injuries, and try and buy their injured players. Pacheco is a guy that we talked about already. You can maybe use Chuba Hubbard in a trade package to go get Pacheco. It's going to cost you more, obviously, but maybe you can take a wide receiver 1 and Chuba Hubbard and get up to Christian McCaffrey. Maybe you could take a high-end wide receiver 2 and Chuba Hubbard and get up to Nico Collins, or maybe you could take a low-end wide receiver 2 and get up to Mike Evans or something like that. Go after somebody that maybe is a little bit injured, because there's a good chance, like you just said, if you have Chuba Hubbard, you probably have a good record. Like every league that I have Chuba Hubbard in, I'm 6-3 or better.
Yeah. And shout out 19% Chuba Hubbard over on Underdog Fantasy. So feel good about that.
Yeah, I wish I thought I was going to have more of him. I do have him on my big dog team. So like financially, like that was like my biggest investment into an underdog draft, but I actually only had 10% of him. I really thought I was going to have more.
Still above market.
Still above market. Anyways, let's rattle off the last one. We've talked about him for like 3 weeks in a row, so I'm literally going to just spend zero time on this. Najee Harris is still a sell. Third worst running back schedule rest of season. 3 games of 16+ PPR points before the bye, so he's coming off of a high. We talked about it with Najee already. It's like the second Najee's not producing, you can't get a wet sock for him, and when he is producing, he's actually valuable. Jaylen Warren is working into this backfield. He's a guy that's definitely going to steal away touches from Najee Harris at times. It hasn't really happened yet, but he is still coming back from injury. Yeah, they had a bye week to rest up again. So Najee Harris, again, what is he actually rest of season? Probably a low-end RB2, high-end RB3. What do people think he is? Well, that's a question for people in your league. Do people think he's a mid RB2 a la Brian Robinson right now? Maybe you could swap those guys one for one.
Yeah, I think we've rehashed the argument on Najee a good amount of times. Again, like we don't want to sound like haters on this guy, but at the same time, if he's going to consistently be going for mid-end RB2 level price tags or better, it's just in your best interest to trade him because, like you said, he's coming off 3 great games in a row, but the opponents in those games, Las Vegas, like you said, one of the biggest run funnels in the league. The New York Jets, who, like, again, you can't throw on them, but
Also
as of late, you've been able to run on them. And the New York Giants, who, again, like, he's had good performances, 21.2, 16.95, 17.35, but like some of the actual talented running backs in the NFL would be having 30-point weeks against some of those teams. I mean, like we just saw fucking Chase Brown against the Raiders, but produce what, 27 points?
Yeah, well, not to mention just the history of Najee Harris tells us that like he hasn't produced 3 good games in a row since his like rookie year. Like it's been a while since he's been producing at that level.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, not to spend too much more time on Najee. Again, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you leave a like down below. And I'm sure, as Corey will plug, the best resource in your fantasy football leagues by far is our weekly rankings manifesto. And there's one of 2 ways to access them.
Yeah, so weekly rankings manifesto, if you guys have a lot of start-sit decisions every week, like you probably do, you can get access to it for free for the rest of the season by going to Underdog Fantasy, signing up using promo code FSE, depositing at least $10, you get up to 1,000 in bonus cash, you get a special pick'em, and once you make a play on the site, that will get emailed to your email inbox within 24 hours. You can get our weekly rankings manifesto also on our site, flockfantasy.com, which is also where our trade finder tool is, which you saw throughout this video, our trade calculator, where you can literally put in mine or Danny's rankings and get our opinions straight up on your trade question. So if you trade away Jonathan Brooks for Ramondre Stevenson because you need wins right now and you're wondering how close are they in our rest of season rankings, and it says it's a fair trade, for example, in one of our rankings, then boom, you just got our opinion on your trade. So definitely check that out if you're interested in that. Our rest of season rankings are up to date. Dynasty rankings, we're going to be doing a off-the-cuff research video session of the 2025 class, probably either today, tomorrow, or Friday. That'll be live on the site, so definitely pay attention for that if you guys are site subscribers. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.